members of Bolsonaro's government. There's going to be surely a fresh congressional inquest into how they were able to stay weeks on end in the open air and they were well supplied. These are well-heeled voters. These are not poor people from.
As you mentioned, the former president, Jair Bolsonaro, was not there. He's in the United States. Has he said anything in the wake of what happened on Sunday?
It took hours. He was silent through most of the day on Sunday. Late that night, he finally chimed in and said, in a pro forma sort of way, that he condemns violence, that's not part of his political philosophy. However, it's a bit disingenuous because he's been urging his supporters not to accept the election results and supported their encampment in Brasilia, supported their call for military to intervene, which was really the end game for Bolsonaro and for many protesters.
And so, just before I let you go, I mean, what do you expect to see now? There are concerns in the country about the strength of democracy, but also where those protesters and their anger will go from here. What are you looking for?
Yes, the huge question is, what does this mean for Lula's ability to govern going forward? This came at an awkward moment for Lula. He sits astride a broad and very unwieldy coalition that spans from the hard left to the center right. They don't always, they're not always on the same wavelength. And he was having trouble justifying a lot of the economic measures that his government has endorsed so far. It's very young, week-old mandate so far. But what we've seen now in the aftermath of these protests is everybody has kind of circled the wagons and rallied to support Lula. Even the stock market barely flinched. And 27 governors came to, all 27 Brazilian governors came to Brasilia for a meeting with Lula yesterday. So in the short run, it strengthened his hand.
We'll leave it there. Mac, I'm glad to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Mac Margolis is a Washington Post columnist based in Brazil. He was in Rio de Janeiro. Guilherme Cassaroy is a professor of political science at the Getulio Vargas Foundation. It's a think tank, and he joins us from Sao Paulo. Guilherme, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being back on the program. You've described the storming of the government buildings on Sunday as an attempted coup. Why did you use that language specifically?
Well, because the rationale behind the storming of the buildings is that protesters refused to accept the elections, the 2022 elections results. So even though Lula has already been sworn in, protesters insist that the only true president is Jair Bolsonaro. And in a cult-like relationship with the former president, these protesters, they are willing to go great lengths to affirm Bolsonaro's legitimacy in power. So even though they lacked manpower and apparently they didn't know much what to do about the riots themselves, I mean, they didn't know what to do next. It seems clear that the motivation behind all that was the distrust, the complete distrust on Brazil's democratic institutions, on the electoral process, and on Lula da Silva's legitimacy.
You said that they were willing to go great lengths. How far do you think they would have gone? President Lula was not there in those presidential buildings, but had he been there, what could have happened?
They could have killed Lula, that's for sure. But I think that the timing was made in such a way that Lula, I mean, that they knew that Lula wasn't there because Lula was in the countryside of the state of São Paulo after a flooding took place in some parts of the state. So Lula's life could have been at risk, that's for sure. But at the same time, I think that what writers really wanted was more like a demonstration of power. Right, so they did it on a Sunday, so they wanted to make sure that no Supreme Court justice would be there, no congressman would be there, and the president wouldn't be there either. But at the same time, the level of destruction the way that they've broken into the public buildings and destroyed works of art, they've destroyed furniture, they broke doors and windows. I mean, it shows a degree of violence that Brazil had never seen before against institutions, to be sure. So that was really a sign that these protesters are not willing to be at peace with the new administration.
Do you think that security forces were complicit in this? You tweeted that the security forces either turned a blind eye or supported the rioters.
Yeah. I mean, this is the main course of the federal government investigation right now, because one of the things that we saw, and it was very shocking to be honest, we saw police officials sipping their coconut water while rioters entered the public buildings and destroyed everything. So I think that both the armed forces and the state-based security forces are to blame. We don't know yet if it's just negligence or if there was some complicity to that. But I think that the rioters would not have been able to enter these public buildings without feeling safe that the security forces would do nothing to stop them.
There was a commentator on Brazilian television who said that if there was no invasion of the U.S. Capitol, there would be no invasion in Brazil. How much of what you saw on Sunday reminds you of what happened 2 years ago on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol?
I would even go as far as to say that if Trump hadn't gotten elected in the United States, Bolsonaro wouldn't have a chance to get elected in Brazil, because it's a far-right wave with lots of transnational connections, lots of emulation. The jargons are the same. The conspiracy theories are very similar. So I think that if you look at the Bolsonaro, the pro-Bolsonaro movement or Bolsonarism, it seems clear that it draws a lot on Trumpism, and because of that, they seem to follow on Trumpism steps very closely. So the impression that I have sometimes is that whenever I look at Brazilian politics, it's like I'm watching a remake of a movie whose ending I already know, because we've seen it in the United States. And it was just a matter of time before it happened, really, because those writers, they have been planning a Capitol-like event since at least September 7th, 2021. That was the moment Bolsonaro really could